there's so much waste being had in certain areas of packaging, particularly around flower, right? The cannabis itself. I believe that flower should not require child-resistant packaging.
In this episode, I get the chance to speak with Jared Mirsky, founder and creative director of Wick & Mortar, a cannabis branding agency out of Seattle. We get to talking pretty deep about the business of cannabis, and I got to admit, sometimes we lose sight of packaging. This episode is extremely important as it highlights just how well you've got to know the industry that you service if you're planning on making any type of impact. Jared shares how understanding your client's industry is going to make you a better problem solver, a better designer, and a better partner to your clients. Whatever that chosen industry is, whether you're a packaging designer in tech, cosmetics, or cannabis, then you better know that industry as well as Jared knows weed. Take a listen. Thanks. We've got Jared Mirsky from Wick & Mortar out of Seattle. Jared, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So can you tell us a little bit about Wick & Mortar and how you got started?
Yeah, it was, the story starts 11 years ago, 2009, when, I had, another agency called Mirsky Media. And in 2009, I recognized an opportunity to create a niche-focused agency in the cannabis industry, or what was to become the cannabis industry. It was really in its early infancy stages then, but I knew when I was, and still am a cannabis consumer, that there was an opportunity to really develop some creative and innovative solutions for what I felt was going to be, like I said, an up and coming industry. Yeah, so I started the world's first cannabis-focused marketing and branding firm, as well as CBD, when that became a thing. Yeah, it's been a really interesting roller coaster, watching the industry change with respect to the rules and regulations, state by state, country by country. It's been an awesome thing to watch as well. But more importantly, we've now become a staple in the industry, we're what you might call a legacy brand. When we started, there were only really one or two ancillary types of businesses. It was like high times and hydroponic shops. So there weren't a lot of resources for people like us who were looking to create a place in an industry that we knew would be a niche. So it's like I said, it's been an interesting roller coaster, but more importantly, I've had a lot of fun, being involved in the space and growing this agency. I think one of the most difficult parts also was the fact that there was just no access to capital.
Sure.
Most business owners then had the ability to raise money, and people weren't investing in things in the cannabis industry then. There wasn't really, it was really black market, gray market. We were only working with dispensaries at the time. Growers remained in the shadows.
Yeah, no, man, it's crazy. It's funny because I remember as a kid, I grew up in Maui. Never would I have thought that anybody would be able to build a legit business in cannabis, right? I remember people I knew and growing up, nobody would drink Budweiser in Maui because Budweiser supported Operation Green Harvest on the islands. And today there's talk of Budweiser launching cannabis drinks in Canada sometime in the next 24 months or something. So it's insane how large it's become. And, you mentioned CBD, and that's kind of moving into potentially Targets and CVSs and those spaces. How does it help you grow?
Well, you're kind of touching on now a subject that leads into, my theory behind federal legalization and really what's going to happen. And this is really based off of comps, right? So my theory is based off of, the traditional market and where CPG brands are today, what you see. And so I wanted to preface with that. But now if you look and you see what's happening in all of these product categories, you'll notice that every single brand, or for the most part, most of these brands try to be everything to everyone. They have one brand name with 20 different products. And that doesn't exist in the traditional space. I mean, that's why there's, P&Gs and Johnson & Johnson's, and, they own a myriad of brands that fit within different market segments. So you can't be everything to everyone. That's why Coca-Cola owns so many different brands. That's why Nestle owns so many different brands, because they needed to diversify and create brands that had the ability to impact consumers in different ways. Then you look at so we're talking about the CBD market and the THC market, right? So the THC market, and the reason why it's applicable to even the CBD or CBD space is because, for example, we have a lot of distribution relationships with respect to CBD opportunities, right? You've got CVS, you've got Walgreens, Albertsons, Safeway. I mean, there's all of these different opportunities, Vitamin World, right? Now, when you look at the THC space, your only opportunity is to develop licensing deals with licensed cultivators, right? Or multi-state operators or vertically integrated companies. And that's the only way you can create a national brand. You have to basically set up a JV of some sort. It doesn't need to be a JV, it can be a profit share deal, but you have to do a deal with a cultivator. And so what that means is that it's extremely difficult to become a national brand in the THC market. So now that I've prefaced with that, the biggest hurdle that most brands have with respect to becoming a national brand is because they think that they need to have a license to grow. They need an application, and they need to file an application. They need to grow their own weed. And yes, you do get better margins, but if you had the ability to create a national brand in a much shorter period of time because you didn't have the burden of keeping lights on with respect to, this farm. Again, look at RX Bar. They sold to Kellogg for $600 million. They didn't own their factories. They just had great national distribution. And I think they were only around for a few years before they sold. Yeah. Imagine being able to do that in the cannabis industry, right? That's without having the burden of this production facility. You look at all of the oversaturated brands in the space with respect to the ones that cater to everyone, right? It's an everything to everyone brand. Where companies need to start going is they need to start going more niche, right? They need to be more specific as to the intention behind whatever their differentiating value proposition is. So if I'm trying to create a CBD brand and I want to, sell it to Colgate at some point, I need to create a very targeted product. I can't create a brand that has, a CBD mouthwash, a pet treat, and all this other shit under the same name, because Colgate's going to be like, well, no, I don't want any of that other stuff. I just want this. And if you develop a much stronger brand around that one particular product, the equity within that brand, so brand equity, becomes much more valuable. And that's important when you're looking to sell your company.
Are you seeing that as a big goal for a lot of these brands?
I'm seeing it's like the goal, like be more niche focused. And then if you're a, THC brand, focus on developing national distribution opportunities, which is what people can do if they want to work with us. We have that set up already. And then, if a company has the ambitions of doing or pursuing that, it's a much more safer play. And the reason why, Vilio, is because when cannabis goes federally legal, there's going to be an insane overproduction of cannabis because there's going to be now national distribution. And so there isn't the need for all of these micro farms and these farms everywhere. And so what's going to happen, right? They're going to be gone.
Yeah.
And they're going to have to find a way to sell that real estate. So you can avoid the burden of sitting on that and be able to sell your brand from an equity perspective, from an acquisition perspective, much faster without less risk, because you can enter into the CBD market.
Have you been a part of some of those sales? Or are you seeing a lot of those sales happening at this point? Or is this just kind of where the market's going?
There are acquisitions that have occurred already. And there are, more importantly, is a ton of data to support, niche focused branding. More importantly, the data shows that there are even very specific categories of focus that you can create initially in terms of your product roadmap to obtain a stronger and lower customer acquisition cost. So like you look at like I'll give you an example, like pet products, right? Data shows that we as humans will spend more money on our pets to ensure that their health is, secure, more so than we will on ourselves. We'll take them to the vet more than we'll take ourselves to the hospital. We'll buy them anything they need. We'll spend as much money as we need to in order to keep them alive. They're not just our pet, they're our child, right? And so that being said, we're talking about a very loyal customer, one of the most loyal customers, in fact. And the fact of the matter is that if they find a product that works really, really well for their pet, they are not going to abandon that product for another. They're going to keep and continue to purchase that, because once you've found something that works, why change? However, that's completely different in the CBD space as well as THC space with respect to us as humans, right? We want to gravitate towards as many different things as we can. We have this wandering eye. We see another brand that's got a pretty packaging. With pretty packaging, we want to try it. Ooh, it's a new strain. Ooh, we want to try it. Ooh, it's a new experience. I want to try it. So we bounce. Our dog's only experience that we care about is, are they healthy and are they safe? If it tastes bad, I don't really care. I just want my dog to be healthy. Sorry, you're going to live.
Hey man, Wick and Mortar, your team is a full service agency.
Yeah.
You guys kill it on packaging. How important are you seeing the role of packaging in cannabis? Like, what's that consumer journey?
That's also a great question. So for the longest time, strain specificity had been, the key differentiator between the purchasing decision on a product, right? Because it was like, well, what's the hottest strain, right? And packaging didn't matter because weed once sold itself.
Right.
That's not the case anymore. Now you get into an era where it's about packaging and it's about what looks the coolest, what stands out on the shelf, what pops. And in many states, it's also, what is the most inexpensive price? Sometimes there are states where packaging doesn't matter nearly as much, whereas price is by far the most core differentiator you can find, which sucks, but that's just the case.
What do you mean in some states it doesn't
State.
matter?
Yeah, well, Washington State, it's a race to the bottom, who can be the most inexpensive. Unfortunately, the consumer market in Washington is completely different than it is in California. Don't get me wrong, Washington has a ton of amazing, amazing brands, but what happens when the industry becomes saturated with great brands? What then becomes your differentiating value proposition? Price.
Sure, price.
So how do you compete with that when you have all of these different brands? So going back to kind of the customer acquisition cost with respect to CBD products, right? You've got to figure out what your core key differentiating value propositions are. It can't be about packaging anymore. It needs to be deeper than that. So you have to look into, your brand and really identify, what are we doing to be socially responsible? What kind of packaging methods can we create to become more sustainable? Whereas these become larger differentiators, it really also ties into, the overall practice of branding in itself. And I think that a lot of companies just don't do a good job of branding and marketing themselves nearly as well as they should. Now, to go back to your question, though, packaging. So the other thing is, strain specificity. So that was a huge deal with respect to identifying, what you wanted to purchase. The next thing became experience. This is where the curve is at right now. And people and brands are starting to recognize that, okay, there's an opportunity to create and strengthen the user experience and user journey in retrospect to how our products are imagined with respect to the customer using it. So an example would be like this brand we worked with, Cannabis, out of California. The experiences, rather than relying on strain specificity, because that doesn't mean much to a lot of people, especially new consumers. That's confusing. I don't know what Blue Dream means. Like, that's a huge disconnect. So what, I'm supposed to go online and look it up and then find out what that means to me and then look at all of the reviews. And that's just a lot of work. So, much like technology existing to make our lives more simple, so should the process of purchasing cannabis. So with Candescent, we created these experiences. They had this experience. It was chill, calm, create, connect, charge. Far more relatable than Granddaddy Purple or Alaskan Thunderfuck, right? Just the most odd names. And to a new consumer, that can be a little overwhelming. So how do we make it easy and simple for the consumer to purchase a product based on the intended experience? And there's obviously more effective solutions to create, better consumer engagement.
So, you talked about Washington, you talked about California. I'm in Arizona. In terms of the way that packaging is displayed at different dispensaries, are you seeing it being the same, across the states, or is different states, have different regulations?
Different states do have different regulations, as do countries. It's funny too that you mentioned this. I was just having a conversation with someone during an IG live earlier today about this, and that was that there's so much waste being had in certain areas of packaging, particularly around flower, right? The cannabis itself. I believe that flower should not require child-resistant packaging. Edibles, yes, but flower, no. And same with cartridges and concentrates. And the reason why is, unless it's like a distillate, because that's already activated THC, but it's because the THC is not activated until heat. And if a child is old enough to smoke it, they're old enough to know how to open up child-resistant packaging. So it's a huge waste of money and materials and time. And to me, it's just really annoying that that's not obvious. Edibles, again, I firmly believe should be CR certified completely. But again, flower. So it's just, there's different rules and regulations in different states. And it just, thankfully I've been in the industry for 11 years. So I've been able to be a part of even the regulatory process, both in Washington and in Oregon, with respect to helping them strengthen their rules and regs around packaging and compliance.
Speaking about those regulations, then, how do those play into the design of packaging when you're talking about a brand that sells in multiple states? What happens then?
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of identify the design itself. can relatively be the same. I think
Mhm.
the only differentiators are whether or not it's CR certified required, or if there are any additional labeling requirements in retrospect to the state. It doesn't really change too much. It's just more of a supply chain pain in the ass, because now you've got so many different products to manage for different states. And so that can just get a little bit hectic, is where in the traditional space, you don't have to worry about that.
Sure. Yeah, it's one product, and that doesn't matter.
Yeah, and the time it takes to package products in the cannabis industry takes quite a bit longer than the traditional space as well, because you've got oftentimes secondary labeling, where you've got to print out your all of your tracking information and the strain information. It's that universal UPC code, basically. And so there's just a lot of extra work that goes into packaging cannabis, as where with other companies, it's in the traditional food space, it's different. CPG space.
You mentioned sustainability. How important is sustainable packaging in cannabis right now?
It's not as important as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
More and more brands are leaning towards that, just because they're starting to find that consumers do care. There isn't enough data yet to show how much consumers care about packaging in relation to the cannabis industry, as to whether or not it should be sustainable or not. But I think if you have an opportunity to be a responsible brand, and for you to make good choices, especially if they don't incur any additional cost, again, given how small margins can be in certain states. I think you definitely want to make sure that you're playing it safe. But go to Google, you type in Narvona and Forbes. They did an article on this packaging that we won a global packaging award for, and they awarded us that not just because the packaging was sexy and unique and luxury, but it was because of the fact that it was also fully sustainable. You could recycle every part of it, and that's not something you see happen in the cannabis industry very often at all. Looking at how do you differentiate yourself from your competitors beyond aesthetic, these are some things that you can use to help further your success.
You mentioned that this piece that you won an award for was fully recyclable, but you've also talked about luxury. So I just had an interview with Vincent Villager, who was the former director of packaging at Burberry, and he talked about how important materials were in creating those consumer experiences. With all these new different hemp papers that are coming out to the market now, all these different materials that are trying to pull the plant into it. Are you finding yourself looking at some of those? Is that becoming more part of the design process?
No, we are. And I can't recall the name of the company off the top of my head, just because I've got members of my team working on it. But there's this company that just came out not long ago that actually uses the waste, the hemp and THC plant, and turns it into a pulp, which is then converted into a substrate for packaging.
Mohawk paper just came out with a hemp-based paper. It gives you a certain texture to it. You can see little fibers in there. But I was just curious.
Yeah, and I mean, there's hemp plastics. It's just there isn't enough production of that type of material yet to quantify the ability for people to spend the money to get into like the hemp textile arena yet.
Yeah.
It's going to be huge. It's just not there yet. So that's going to be another wave of the hemp industry. So I'm excited to see that.
How's your team inspired by luxury packaging? Can you talk about Candescent?
What inspires us is kind of two things, what we don't see happening in the industry, and using that as an opportunity to position clients as well as brands we're building for ourselves. I guess it's hard to say. I mean, inspiration's everywhere, right? I mean, how can you really define one point of inspiration? I mean, I find it in architecture. I find it in art. I find it in everything. I mean, everything's art to me, really.
So what's, I see you posting on LinkedIn, your team's posting all the time. You guys are really vocal on social media. I think I saw you pulling up to somebody's house and they had a plant growing in the front yard and you just kind of pulled it and burned it. It was,
oh yeah, that was that was actually at Ricky Williams' estate in Idlewild, California. We were filming a documentary with him.
What's the documentary on?
Well, Ricky and I have become really good friends over the last year and a half. And, during that time, I had an opportunity a lot of opportunity to spend with him and learn more about who is Ricky now versus who is Ricky then. And if you've ever seen any of his documentaries, like Run Ricky Run, or he won the Heisman. He was a football player. He played for the Miami Dolphins. But then he left the NFL to pursue a career in herbalism, cannabis, and astrology. And so that's like super fascinating to me because, when you look at branding and you look at archetypes, they all stem from astrological signs. I don't know if you knew that.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
So it's just reappropriating, those astrological signs into layman's terms, which is what archetypes are, because each astrological sign has its horoscope, which horoscopes are bullshit. But nonetheless, there's a lot of meaning to astrology. And if you look at your birth chart, you're a sun sign, you have a moon sign. So you have a lot of different traits about you that don't stem from just one sign, but multiple. And so this becomes like your own archetype. And so when you look at the human experience between astrology and the archetyping process of branding, you can use the practice of astrology to actually develop, really awesome opportunities to tell really cool and creative stories whereas they didn't exist. You look at a lot of CEOs that come into the cannabis industry, a lot of them don't really have anything interesting about them that they want to talk about. Like, I'm a chiropractor. I just want to make money. I'm like, okay, well, do you have a story you want? No, not really. All right. So where do we start? And so Ricky and I do what's called astro branding, where we basically take the birth chart of the CEO or founder, and then the birth chart of the company, which stems from the articles of formation. And then we develop our archetype based off of traits that stem from both, so that when we look at the signs from each birth chart, we can actually create a story. There's a guy online that did a representation of the Red Bull's approach to this process. He showed the birth chart of the business was landed on Aries, which is like, Aries is red, it's got horns, and it means to go where no man's gone before. Then you look at the CEO's birth chart, and it was Taurus. Well, Taurus is a bull. There's a lot of meaning there, but then the main ingredient in Red Bull is taurine. So you take both of those signs, and that was how Red Bull's story was created.
Do you use this process for all the brands that you create?
Not all brands, but we've done this with a few.
Yeah.
Like I said, Ricky and I have only been friends for about a year and a half. We've just started doing this together over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So, again, a large part of the documentary is about who is Ricky now and where is he going today and in the future, right? And so a lot of it talks about his involvement in the cannabis industry, herbalism, again, astrology. I'll send you the trailer for it.
Killer, man. Yeah, that'd be awesome. For anybody out there that's working on cannabis packaging, what would you say is like the top thing that they've got to keep in mind when they're creating packaging for cannabis?
Be very mindful about, what colors you use. If you're really focused on just, one state initially,
yeah,
remember your brand can evolve, as can your packaging. So if now strategically it makes sense to create packaging solutions that pop because everyone's using black and gold and, it's all a sea of sameness, well, stand out. You can be strategic about that. Your packaging does have room to evolve. We're talking about, again, an industry in its infancy stages. So the other thing is, I would say, is make sure that you focus on creating an experience around your packaging, ensuring that, there is some sort of indicator as to the intended experience consumer is going to have once they've tried your product. Then I would also say that if you can ensure your packaging is sustainable, that is always preferred.
Obviously, your team is staying busy, kind of focusing on what's happening after the virus. But I also noticed that you're doing something called High Grade Hope.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. High Grade Hope was an idea that stemmed over the course of this, trying time. And really what we aspire to do is help, companies and brands in need of creative services, whereas they can't obtain perhaps the capital or resources due to certain systemic issues, as well as COVID-19. Looking at this kind of first, approach to our High Grade Hope campaign, our objective is to ensure that the, companies that we are, helping, really do need it and, aren't just lazy, right? We want to make sure that, these are individuals that deserve it and for all intents and purposes, have great leadership skills. High Grade Hope also encompasses a number of amazing mentors, ranging from Ricky Williams to Josh Kesselman, who's the CEO and founder of Raw, Sue Taylor, Steve D'Angelo. Gosh, so many amazing people.
So High Grade Hope is almost like a complete business makeover.
It is. It is. It's a business makeover, and our goal is to develop a series that showcases the makeover and kind of like it's kind of like home makeovers. It's kind of like the same thing. We do want to turn this into a show eventually, or as soon as possible, just because we think it's got legs to do that. So we're in talks with a couple people. Nonetheless, we are content creators. We produce a lot of video content ourselves, and so we want to do something good for the industry and create an opportunity to share the wealth, so to speak.
If there's a designer out there that wants to work with Wick and Mortar, what kind of work should they have in their portfolio? What kind of things are you looking for?
Oh, great question. Really good logo design concepts. I would love to see, how you arrive to that. Process is important to me, as is speed. I'm not looking for a unicorn, although I've been pretty lucky at finding them. I really value people that understand the business side of things, or at least aspire to want to learn the business side of things, because it says to me that it makes me feel like they're more responsible because they're or entrepreneurial. I think that's the word I'm looking for. And I just gravitate towards people like that because, I look at Wick and Mortar as, yes, it's my company and I founded it and started it, but it's not my company. It's everyone's company at Wick and Mortar, right? We're a family, and that's, I think what's the most important piece for us is our company culture. And so if you fit within that, sorry, I know I'm going on a tangent because you just asked me about their work, but logos, UX, UI, we are looking for, strong web designers, not coders, but just designers.
Yeah.
But being able to not just design, but speak code to whomever it is that we're then passing that piece of the project off to. I always tell my clients who are like, well, why would I hire an agency when I could just, hire my friend who's a designer? I say to, what kind of problems do you think designers solve? What kind of question is that? Right? Well, designers solve designer problems. If you're a designer and you're saying I'm a graphic designer, then you solve graphic designer problems. But if you want somebody to come in and help you solve problems that relate to how you're going to receive a higher return on your investment with respect to the money that you're spending with us, well, then you hire an agency.
Right.
We show you how that value translates. If you can show me how your value translates, let's have a conversation.
I think that's it, man.
Cool.
Perfect.
I
think it's been killer, man. So if anybody wants to get in contact with you, where can people find you?
Well, if you want to get in contact with me personally, you can obviously find me on my LinkedIn as I'm active there, but also you can follow me on my Instagram. I've got even more ridiculous content on there because it's a little bit more personal. So, you're not going to see videos of me hitting, 10-foot joints, or I'm sorry, not 10 foot. I would post that on LinkedIn. That's LinkedIn worthy. But you're not going to see me hitting 1-foot joints on LinkedIn. You're going to see that on my Instagram. So there's some craziness in there, but LinkedIn and IG. You can also check us out at wickandmortar.com.
Chill, man. I'll have links in the show notes and everything.
Cool.
Appreciate you, man, taking the time out of your day to just chat with us, talk to us about packaging.
Appreciate you.
This is the final episode for season 1. Stay tuned for season 2 coming soon. Once again, my name is Avelio Matos, and this is Package Design Unboxed. I want to thank Jared Mirsky for being on, and thanks to you for listening. We'll talk soon.